If you are listening to this right now, there is a quiet possibility that something in your body has already begun to change. Not suddenly and not loudly, but in a way that is easy to overlook. The kind of change you notice only when you pause long enough to feel it. Perhaps when you wake up a little slower than you used to, or when your energy fades earlier in the afternoon, or when your body asks for rest in moments where it once pushed forward without hesitation. And like many people, you may have asked yourself questions you don't always say out loud. Questions like, is this normal? Is this how aging begins? Or is something wrong with me? And the truth is that most people grow up hearing about aging as if it is a single downhill road, as if the body simply weakens piece by piece until very little remains. But that idea is incomplete and often deeply misleading, because the human body does not age all at once, and it does not age in the same way across all systems. Instead, it changes in layers, carefully and selectively, almost intelligently, with some functions shifting early as a way of protecting others, and some remaining remarkably stable far longer than people expect. And understanding this sequence matters more than most people realize, because when you don't understand how the body actually ages, every small change can feel like a warning. Every unfamiliar sensation can trigger fear, and fear itself becomes more exhausting than the changes that caused it. So today, we are not going to talk about aging as a loss, but as a progression, a timeline, a series of adjustments that your body makes quietly, often in your favor, and we will begin with the changes that tend to appear first, not because they are the most dangerous, but because they are the most noticeable. And the first of these changes for many people is energy, not pain, not illness, but energy. The way it rises and falls throughout the day, the way it no longer feels endless, the way it becomes more sensitive to how well you slept, how much stress you carry, and how gently you treat yourself. And this shift often confuses people because they assume that feeling tired means something is failing, when in reality, it often means something is becoming more efficient, because as the body ages, it becomes less wasteful with its resources. The tiny structures inside your cells that produce energy gradually become less productive, not because they are broken, but because they are aging along with you. And instead of pushing energy outward constantly, the body begins to prioritize where that energy goes, choosing recovery over speed, stability over intensity. And this is why many older adults still have good days, even strong days. But notice that those days are followed by a clearer need for rest, and that need is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that your body is asking to be respected rather than overridden. And when people respond to this shift with patience instead of resistance, they often find that their energy becomes more predictable again, just arranged differently. And closely connected to this change in energy is another early adjustment that many people experience, which is the gradual change in muscle. Not a sudden loss, not a collapse, but a slow and steady reduction in muscle mass that begins earlier in life than most people realize and continues quietly year by year. And this process can sound alarming when it is described clinically, but in daily life, it usually shows up as something much simpler, like needing a bit more effort to lift objects, or noticing that strength fades faster when movement is neglected. And what is important to understand is that while muscle size may change relatively early, the body holds on to coordination and control far longer, especially when movement remains part of daily life. And this is why so many people who live into advanced age do not appear physically powerful, yet remain capable, steady, and independent, because functional strength depends less on size and more on consistent use, and the body responds very well to being reminded that movement still matters. Even gentle movement, even ordinary movement, like walking, standing, reaching, and carrying. And as these physical changes unfold, sleep often begins to change as well, sometimes in ways that feel frustrating, because sleep no longer arrives as deeply or stays as long as it once did. Nights may include more awakenings, mornings may begin earlier, and people often worry that this means something is wrong. But neurologically, this shift is expected because the structure of sleep evolves with age, spending less time in the deepest stages while maintaining enough restorative function to support the body. And what truly matters is not how many hours you sleep, but whether sleep still allows your system to reset, whether you wake feeling at least somewhat restored. And for many older adults, the answer is yes, even if sleep looks different than it once did. And when sleep changes in this way, it often pairs with subtle changes in the joints, especially stiffness that appears after rest and eases with movement. A sensation that can be uncomfortable, but is usually more about lubrication than damage, because cartilage gradually becomes less elastic over time, and joints respond best when they are gently moved rather than held still. And this is why many people notice that the body feels worse when it sits too long and better when it stays lightly active. And these early changes in energy, muscle, sleep, and joints often arrive together quietly, without clear boundaries, creating the impression that aging has suddenly accelerated, when in reality, the body is simply shifting its priorities, conserving where it once spent freely, and adapting where it once pushed aggressively. And alongside these physical adjustments, the senses often begin to change earlier than expected as well, with vision becoming less sharp in low-contrast situations and hearing becoming less sensitive to higher frequencies, changes that are rooted in the aging of sensory receptors rather than the failure of the brain. And this distinction matters because while input may soften, processing often remains strong, allowing many older adults to understand conversations clearly even when sounds are quieter, and to interpret visual information accurately, even when details are less crisp, and the brain adapts remarkably well to these changes, compensating in ways that often go unnoticed. And when all of these early changes are viewed together, a pattern emerges, one that is very different from the idea of decline. Because what you see instead is a body that is refining itself, becoming more selective, more efficient, more focused on balance than speed. And this refinement can feel uncomfortable when it is misunderstood, but when it is recognized for what it is, it often becomes easier to work with rather than against. And this understanding alone can reduce a great deal of unnecessary anxiety. Because once you realize that not every early change is a warning, you stop interpreting your body as something that is breaking down and begin to see it as something that is adjusting, preparing, and protecting. And this perspective sets the foundation for understanding the changes that come later, the systems that often remain stable far longer than people expect, which we will explore next. But for now, it is enough to recognize that the first changes of aging are rarely dramatic, rarely dangerous, and often purposeful. And when you meet them with patience instead of fear, they tend to settle into a rhythm that supports rather than limits your life. As the body continues to age, something very different begins to happen beneath the surface. Something that many people never hear about because it doesn't announce itself with obvious symptoms. And that is the quiet stability of systems that have learned how to endure. Because while some functions change early to conserve energy and protect balance, others are designed to last, and they do so with remarkable patience. And one of the first places this endurance becomes visible is in the rhythm of the heart. Not the dramatic pounding of youth or the speed that once came effortlessly, but a steadier, more economical rhythm that prioritizes consistency over intensity. And this is why many older adults find that while they may not move as fast as they once did, they can still sustain daily activity reliably, because the heart is less interested in bursts and more interested in continuity. And when movement becomes calm and regular rather than forceful, the heart responds with resilience, supporting circulation and oxygen delivery quietly and efficiently, often well into advanced age. And alongside this steady rhythm, the digestive system continues to do its work with surprising durability, adapting rather than failing, slowing its pace slightly, becoming more sensitive to routine, but remaining capable of nourishing the body when it is treated with consistency and care. And this is why many people discover that simple habits, regular meals, familiar foods, and unhurried eating become more important than complexity, because the digestive tract favors rhythm over novelty as time passes, and when that rhythm is respected, it often continues to function smoothly for decades. And while these internal systems carry on their work, another deeply underestimated form of endurance reveals itself in the way the body remembers, because although the immune response may slow with age, its memory often remains strong, allowing the body to recognize familiar challenges and respond with learned efficiency rather than panic. And this is one reason many older adults recover steadily from common illnesses, even if recovery takes a little longer than it once did, because speed is not the same as effectiveness, and effectiveness often lasts far longer than people expect. And as these internal systems demonstrate their quiet strength, something equally important unfolds in the emotional landscape, often without people noticing at first, because over time the mind becomes less reactive, less easily pulled into extremes, and more selective about where it places attention and energy. And this shift does not mean indifference. It means discernment, the ability to let certain worries pass without amplification, to step back from emotional noise, and to return to calm more readily after disturbance. And this emotional steadiness supports the body in ways that science continues to uncover, reducing chronic stress signals and allowing internal systems to operate without constant interference. And it is in this calmer internal environment that many people find a sense of perspective emerging. Not because life has become simpler, but because the mind has learned which battles are worth fighting and which can be released. And this perspective is closely tied to another form of endurance that often surprises people, which is the preservation of judgment, insight, and understanding, even as processing speed slows and recall becomes less immediate. Because while the brain may take longer to retrieve information, its ability to evaluate, to reason, and to see patterns often remains intact, allowing older adults to make thoughtful decisions and navigate complex situations with a depth that younger minds sometimes lack. And this is why wisdom feels different from intelligence, because it is not about speed or volume, but about clarity. And clarity often deepens with age rather than disappearing. And when you step back and look at all of these later changing systems together, a different picture of aging begins to emerge, one that is not defined by loss, but by reorganization, a gradual shift away from excess and toward efficiency, away from urgency and toward balance. And this reorganization is not random, it is adaptive, shaped by millions of years of human biology that favors endurance over intensity as life progresses. And when people are unaware of this design, they often misinterpret natural adjustments as failure, pushing their bodies harder when rest is needed, or fearing change when adaptation is occurring. But when awareness replaces assumption, the relationship with the body begins to change, and that relationship matters because the body responds differently when it is treated as an ally rather than an adversary. And this is why understanding what changes later is just as important as recognizing what changes first, because it reminds you that much of what sustains life, circulation, digestion, immune memory, emotional balance, and judgment is built to last, often quietly and reliably. And this understanding has the power to soften fear, to reduce unnecessary stress, and to encourage a more patient approach to aging, one that allows the body to do what it has always done best, which is to adapt, to prioritize, and to preserve what matters most. And when you view aging through this lens, the process becomes less about resisting time and more about moving with it, honoring the systems that are still working, supporting the ones that are adjusting, and trusting trusting that change does not automatically mean decline, but often signals a shift toward a different kind of strength, one that values steadiness over speed, depth over urgency, and balance over force. And when this perspective settles in, many people find that their relationship with aging becomes gentler, less driven by fear, and more grounded in understanding, allowing them to meet each stage of life with greater ease, confidence, and respect for the quiet intelligence of the body.